The story begins with a man named David, who is traveling by ship to a remote island. David works for the weather department, and the government has assigned him to live on this island for a year, sending back daily weather reports. The ship's captain, Axel, drops him off, but at first, the island looks completely deserted. After walking a little further, they come across a small house, built specifically for weather officers to stay in. But the moment they step inside, they find the place in complete chaos, with things scattered everywhere. This makes Axel suspicious and worried that something might be wrong here. David, however, calms him down, insisting he'll be fine and asking him to return to his ship. Just then, they notice a lighthouse nearby. Thinking there must be someone inside, David and Axel head there. Axel even sends his men back to the boat while he checks it out with David. But something about the lighthouse feels strange. The place is surrounded by wooden weapons, which is very unusual for such a lonely, isolated island. Even stranger, nobody answers the door. So, David pushes the gate open, and both of them step inside. There, they meet a man who introduces himself as Gruner, the caretaker of the lighthouse. Axel informs him that David is here to replace the previous weather officer. Curious, Axel asks what happened to the old officer. Gruner claims the man died of typhus, but when Axel asks to see the body, Gruner coldly replies that he last saw the officer walking into the sea and he never returned. Something about this story doesn't sit right with Axel. He tries convincing David to come back with him, but David has already made up his mind to stay. Before leaving, Axel hands David his gun, warning him to use it if any danger arises. David settles into the house, organizing his belongings. While unpacking, he stumbles upon the old officer's diary, which contains sketches of strange sea creatures, along with a photo of the officer's wife. David flips through the pages, but doesn't pay much attention, and soon he drifts off to sleep. He ignores it and continues with his work. Through his binoculars, he spots Gruner, and for a split second, he also sees someone else near him. But as soon as he blinks, the figure disappears. David assumes it must have been his imagination and heads home. That night, strange noises echo outside his house. At first, David thinks it might be Gruner, but when he approaches the door, he hears animal-like growls and something trying to force the gate open. Soon, the entire house is surrounded by eerie sounds. Panicked, David hides in the basement, peeking out through a crack. That's when a creature slips inside the house, the very same kind he had seen drawn in the old officer's diary. One of the creatures even peers through the crack and spots him. Terrified, David stabs it in the eye with his knife, forcing it to retreat. The following morning, David steps out and sees footprints in the sand, all leading back to the sea. It becomes clear these creatures only come out at night. Desperate, David rushes to Gruner's place, shouting at him to open the gate. But instead of helping, Gruner angrily pours water on him and yells, "You should have never come here." Frustrated and alone, David decides to take matters into his own hands. He builds weapons out of wood, digs trenches around his house, and fills them with logs, books, and petrol, so he can set them on fire when the creatures attack again. He loads his gun and prepares himself for the long night ahead. David waits for the creatures to arrive. Before long, he hears their terrifying cries echoing outside. Soon, the creatures begin crawling in through the window. David immediately starts shooting at them, but his bullets run out quickly. In desperation, he rushes outside and sets fire to the trap he had prepared. The pit filled with wood, books, and petrol. Flames spread rapidly around the house, scaring the creatures away. But the fire grows uncontrollable and begins consuming the house as well. David narrowly escapes, though his hand gets badly burned. He hides behind a rock for cover. Just then, rain begins pouring down, forcing him to spend the night outside in the cold. By morning, David realizes how much damage the fire has caused. His house is ruined, and he can no longer live there. With no choice left, he heads toward Gruner. David spots him walking toward the sea and follows, but suddenly, a sea creature attacks him. David fights back and manages to point his gun at the creature. At that moment, Gruner arrives, aiming his weapon at David and ordering him to let the creature go. Gruner then explains something shocking. This particular creature will not harm David because it lives with him. In fact, it obeys Gruner completely. He offers David a deal if David hands over all his supplies: food, alcohol, tobacco, and bullets. Then Gruner will allow him to stay inside the lighthouse with them. David reluctantly agrees, and together they carry his belongings into the lighthouse. Exhausted, David falls asleep. When he wakes up, he is startled to see the creature licking his burned hand. At first, he panics, but then notices that the creature's touch is actually healing his wound much faster. Confused, David asks Gruner how this creature came to live with him and why it obeys him so faithfully. Gruner reveals that long ago he saved its life, and ever since, it has treated him as its master. However, his treatment of it is cruel. He beats it, abuses it, and yet keeps it tied to him. Once, the creature had bitten him, but after he brutally punished it, it never dared disobey him again. It now becomes clear to David, the reason the other sea creatures attack the lighthouse every night is to rescue their captured companion. But Gruner refuses to let it go, killing them instead because he cannot stand the idea of losing his slave. Gruner shows David the upper levels of the lighthouse and boasts. When David asks why he didn't leave with Captain Axel when he had the chance, Gruner proudly declares, "This is my world. I am the king here. I live as I please, and no one can stop me." David responds that he cannot live like this, and the first time he sees a ship passing, he will send a signal. That evening, the creature quietly approaches David. Unlike Gruner, David treats it kindly, and slowly, a bond of trust begins to form between them. Later that night, Gruner drags David upstairs and fires a flare into the sky, summoning the other sea creatures. He even orders his captive creature to call out to them. Gruner's philosophy is simple and brutal. If we want to survive here, we must kill them all. Soon, dozens of creatures come swarming toward the tower. David freezes in fear, his body paralyzed at the sight of so many attackers. Gruner, on the other hand, fights ferociously, shooting and killing them one by one. Unable to bear the violence, David retreats inside, leaving Gruner to face them alone. By morning, Gruner angrily warns David that there is no place for the weak here. If you want to stay alive, you must kill them too. He then sends David to fetch water. When David returns, he is horrified to find Gruner being intimate with the creature. Later, as they eat, the creature gently offers David a crab, showing affection. But Gruner notices this and grows jealous. Furious, he storms away. That same night, Gruner once again summons the creatures, but this time, David refuses to shoot at them. Enraged, Gruner locks him outside the gate, abandoning him to the monsters, claiming David is worthless to him. Yet the next morning, when Gruner opens the gate, he is stunned to see David still alive, though covered in blood. He had killed all the creatures all by himself. In this way, both of them kept fighting and killing the creatures for several days. But for a few weeks, no creature had come to attack the tower. One day, David asked Gruner why this particular creature kept calling her own kind here only to be killed. To this, Gruner sharply replied that in the eyes of the creatures, they were the hunters, and that was the reason the creatures always attacked them. Time kept passing like this. At night, both men took turns keeping watch. Meanwhile, every day Gruner kept forcing himself on the creature, while David could do nothing to help her. One day, David saw the creature bathing. He went closer to her and touched her skin, which was icy cold. From then on, David began to call her a Nereis, which means mermaid. Gruner was watching all this from a distance, but since he still needed David, he didn't say anything. That same night, David and Gruner played chess, and David defeated him. Enraged, Gruner picked up his gun. David tried to calm him, saying it was just a game. But even then, Gruner fired the gun, not at David, but at an attacking creature. In fact, that night they had skipped their watch, and the creatures had taken advantage of this, launching an attack. This time, there were far too many creatures to handle. Forced to retreat, Gruner and David rushed inside the light cabin to hide. During the struggle, one creature wounded Gruner's leg. Both of them then sat down, ready to accept death, for they had no way out. But just then, morning arrived, and with daylight, the creatures returned to the sea. Their lives were spared. Afterward, Einar licked Gruner's wound and healed it. David then told Gruner that they wouldn't survive another attack, as their food supplies and bullets were nearly finished. A few days later, David found a locket placed on the grave of a creature. At the same time, he spotted a ship in the distance. Excited, he quickly fired a flare gun to signal them, but Gruner attacked him, stopping him from sending the signal. He didn't want David to leave him. In that moment, Einar tried to attack Gruner in order to protect David. So, Gruner stepped away from David and instead pulled out his belt, threatening to teach Einar a lesson. But Einar managed to escape. The next day, David saw Einar leaving the tower. He followed her, only to find that Gruner had beaten her badly. David felt terrible for her. To comfort her, he showed her a small boat he had crafted carefully out of bones. Seeing this, Einar led him to an old, abandoned boat. David was thrilled, and he told Gruner about it. But Gruner revealed he already knew. Years ago, A Portuguese ship had wrecked here during a storm. Survivors had reached shore with that boat, but the creatures killed them. He also revealed that those men had been illegally smuggling dynamite. David suggested that if they could recover the dynamite, they could blow up many of the creatures at once. But Gruner refused. Later, while David was repairing the small boat, he heard Aneris's voice as she bathed. He went to her, and the two bathed together, growing closer to one another. Gruner saw this too. Soon after, Gruner approached David at the tower and told him he had changed his mind. They would indeed go to the sunken ship to get the dynamite. Together, they set out. David wore a heavy metal diving suit, descended into the sea, and located the dynamite, sending it up to the boat. During this, a creature's child approached him, but the little one didn't harm him and swam away. Somehow, David managed to get out of the suit and back onto the boat. They returned to the tower with the supplies. On inspection, they found a box of dynamite that hadn't been damaged by seawater. Both men then planted dynamite all around the tower, waiting at night for the creatures. But that night, no creatures came. Winter was setting in on the island, and snow began to fall. Even then, Gruner kept standing guard, eager to kill every last creature. One day, David urged him to come inside the tower because the cold had badly weakened him. Inside, they drank coffee. But during this, Gruner began beating Aneris again. He believed that Aneris was somehow keeping her kind from attacking the tower, and that was why no creatures had come for so long. David watches Aneris crying and feels deeply heartbroken for her. Later that night, Gruner grabs Aneris and threatens to kill her unless she calls her fellow creatures to the tower. He even unlocks the gate, forcing David to guard it. Soon, Aneris's cries draw a swarm of creatures toward the lighthouse. One of them suddenly attacks David, but he manages to fight it off and kill it. He rushes back upstairs and yells at Gruner to detonate the dynamite. However, the explosives fail to trigger. David quickly fixes the box and presses the button himself, causing a massive explosion that wipes out all the attacking creatures. By morning, Gruner is seen finishing off the wounded ones. At that moment, David notices a locket around the neck of a dying creature, the very same locket he had once seen placed on a creature's grave. Realization strikes him. These beings never wanted to harm anyone. Just like humans, they had families, emotions, and grief over their lost ones. That night, while on watch duty, David and Gruner hear the haunting cries of the surviving creatures. Meanwhile, Aneris has also left them, returning to her kind. The next day, David builds a stone circle on the beach and places the small boat he had crafted inside it, hoping Aneris will see it and come back. While searching, David also finds an old photograph of Gruner with his wife and some notes. From these, he discovers the shocking truth. Gruner was never the lighthouse caretaker. He was actually the officer who had arrived here before David, and he chose to hide his real identity to remain on the island forever. That evening, David goes to the stone circle and finally sees Aneris with her fellow creatures. One of their young ones approaches David and takes the little boat he had made. David understands now that these creatures never wanted to harm him. They only fought because Gruner slaughtered them mercilessly. At that moment, Gruner storms in with his gun and orders Aneris back into the tower. But this time, she refuses to obey. She's lost too many of her kin to him. Enraged, Gruner begins acting like a madman and storms off into the lighthouse. Meanwhile, David tries to negotiate peace with Aneris and her group, assuring them that he will no longer harm them. But suddenly, Gruner fires a flare gun at the creatures, killing the baby in front of everyone. Aneris, devastated, leaves with her people. Furious, David returns to the lighthouse and attacks Gruner. A brutal fight breaks out, with Gruner nearly killing David. At the last moment, David pleads with him, saying, "You're not a murderer. I know the truth. You're an officer, just like me." Hearing his hidden identity spoken aloud, Gruner is stunned. He drops his axe, realizing the weight of his guilt. Finally, Gruner opens the gate and walks outside, surrendering himself to the creatures. Overwhelmed with remorse, he allows them to tear him apart, his violent end serving as their long-awaited revenge. Time passes. David has now survived on the island for an entire year. When a supply ship finally arrives with a new officer to replace him, David's appearance is so rugged, his long hair and beard, that the officer mistakes him for the caretaker. He keeps asking David if he has seen Officer David. Without hesitation, David lies, saying that David died of illness. It's the same kind of lie Gruner once told at the beginning. In truth, David has chosen to stay behind on the island. In the final scene, we see Aneris now, free at last remaining close to David. No longer a prisoner, but a companion in her own world. And with that, David's story takes a haunting turn. What began as a battle for survival became a journey of truth, guilt, and redemption. Gruner paid the price for his sins, while David chose the very same isolation that once broke another man. Yet, unlike Gruner, David found a strange peace, because he no longer saw the creatures as monsters, but as beings with hearts, memories, and grief of their own. But what do you think? Did David make the right choice, staying behind on the island? And are these creatures really a threat, or just victims of human cruelty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I'll be bringing you many more fascinating movie recaps just like this one. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.
But no one responded. Out of frustration, he forcefully entered the house, only to... After that, he reached Anna's house. He rang the bell several times, but no one responded. Out of frustration, he forcefully... After that, he reached Anna's house. He for payment so that they would agree. Right after that, he reached Anna's house. He rang the bell several times, but no one responded. No one responded. Out of frustration, he forcefully